Florist Dion O'Banion loved to arrange flowers. In fact, he was arranging chrysanthemum bouquets for a large funeral when Frankie Yale showed up at his shop. O'Banion knew Yale, assumed he was there to pick up flowers, reached out to shake his hand. Yale and the two men with him pulled out pistols and shot O'Banion dead. You see, Dion O'Banion was more than just a florist. He was one of the most influential gangsters in Chicago, a rival to Al Capone, and his death would spark many more murders in Chicago's infamous beer wars, which would culminate in the shocking 1929 St. Valentine's Day Massacre. The life of Chicago's arch-killer, Dion O'Banion, deserves to be remembered. O'Banion was born on July 8, 1892, to Irish Catholic parents in the central Illinois town of Maroa. It was a small place, and as of the 2016 census, still has a population of less than 2,000. Most of the residents of Maroa were employed at a nearby cigar factory, though O'Banion's father, Charles, worked as a barber. He was still young, only 9, when his mother contracted tuberculosis and later died. During her treatment, Emma O'Banion was taken to a sanatorium where her child could not visit her because of the risk of infection, but he wrote her notes, which showed his affection. One began, "Dear Mama, I love you awful well." When he was grown, O'Banion replaced her original wooden grave marker with a fine stone monument and returned to Maroa every year to decorate his mother's grave with flowers. His life changed radically when O'Banion's family moved north to an area of Chicago called Kilgubbin, or more menacingly, Little Hell. In August 1865, the Chicago Times described Kilgubbin as a safe retreat for criminals, policemen not venturing to invade its precincts or even cross the border without having a large reserve force. The rough neighborhood, originally named after a location in Ireland, shaped O'Banion's early life. He took up with a street gang of other youngsters named the Little Hellions and formed friendships which would endure the rest of his life. O'Banion was probably stealing a ride on a streetcar, called bumper riding, when he fell off and the car rolled over his left leg. The accident left him with one leg about an inch shorter than the other and a limp, earning him the derisive nickname of Gimpy. However, if someone used that name, O'Banion was known to beat the other person within an inch of his life. He attended Holy Name School for Boys on North Sedgwick Street in Chicago. According to historians, O'Banion had a lovely tenor voice and could be found singing in the choir. His classmates knew him as a charming and easygoing person. One of his childhood friends later said, "He was always full of the devil and having fun." O'Banion had fair hair, brown eyes, and a cherubic round face. In addition to his natural charisma, he had a habit of calling everybody swell fellow. He continued doing that even in his later violent years with people that he battled. James Bennett, a Chicago journalist, said, "He would bestow upon you swell fellow even when his address was in your death book." O'Banion's early religious upbringing would show later in his life. Though he provided illicit alcohol to huge swaths of Chicago, according to some, he refused to drink any of it himself. He also refused to make a profit from prostitution, another major money-making enterprise for less scrupulous mobsters. After he dropped out of school, he began working as a singer-waiter for Bob McGovern at McGovern's Saloon and Cabaret. With a tinny piano playing in the background, O'Banion would serenade patrons of the saloon with Irish folk songs. He also earned money as a newspaper boy, slinging papers for minuscule profits. He quickly discovered that illicit activity like robbing drunks with the rest of the Little Hellions made more money than legitimate jobs. Slowly, O'Banion was sinking into a life of crime. He served 2 terms in Bridewell, also called the House of Corrections, before he turned 21 years old. This jail time, served for burglary and carrying concealed weapons, were the only infractions to land O'Banion behind bars. The rest of his life, O'Banion had the clout and connections to avoid being sentenced. He was active in what has been called the newspaper wars of Chicago, in which O'Banion and his associates would travel from shop to shop, strongly encouraging the owners to sell whichever newspaper was paying them the most for their services that week. If threats of violence failed, O'Banion and company didn't hesitate to use their fists to force the shop owners into compliance. Power and money began flowing to O'Banion with the start of Prohibition in the 1920s. With his lifelong friends helping him, O'Banion began supplying illegal booze to everyone in need of a drink on Chicago's North Side. Historians believe he was one of the first to develop the idea of stealing alcohol from other mobsters, nabbing nearly $100,000 worth of merchandise from another gang in Chicago. The speakeasy business exploded as Prohibition continued. Historians estimate that O'Banion and his crew brought in more than $1 million in profits in 1 year. They made their headquarters in the William F. Schofield Flower Shop, a business that actually sold flowers and made a good front for their more lucrative trade of bootlegged alcohol. With money and influence driving him, O'Banion began flexing his muscles in politics. He held expensive fundraising dinners for his hand-picked candidates, flouting his ill-gotten gains in front of Chicago's rich and powerful. In addition to picking his favorites, O'Banion's henchmen wandered around the polls in his territory in the 42nd and 43rd wards of the city on Election Day, and, similar to his newspaper war tactics of an earlier era, encouraged Chicago citizens to vote for those the mob boss selected. Author Richard Lindbergh, in his book Gangland, Chicago, writes, "The commonly asked question on Election Day, who will carry the 42nd and 43rd, had an obvious answer. O'Banion, in his pistol pockets." O'Banion was known to carry up to 3 guns on his person at all times, and he had his reasons. He was in a territory dispute with Papa Johnny Torrio and his lieutenant, Al Scarface Capone. O'Banion and the Irish mob generally ran the north side of Chicago, while the Italians and Sicilians ran the south side. When the Jenner brothers, who were Sicilian, began to sell alcohol up north, O'Banion came down on them like a hammer. He stole an expensive shipment of their product and wasn't afraid to badmouth them in public, reportedly saying, "To hell with those Sicilians." He attempted to frame Al Capone's outfit for the murder of John Duffy, which most historians believe he committed. O'Banion told reporters at the time, "Whatever happened to Duffy is out of my line. I don't mix with that kind of riffraff." He stirred up more bad blood when he managed to swindle Torrio out of almost $500,000 in a deal. Finally, his fate was sealed after he refused to forgive the debt of one of the Jenner brothers. O'Banion threatened and bullied Torrio and the Jenner brothers, all the while selling the families of deceased mobsters beautiful flower arrangements to grace their coffins. On November 10th, 1924, he was filling an order for more than $10,000 of flowers for Mike Merlo, a mobster who had passed away benignly from cancer, when a call came into the flower shop that someone was coming to pick up the arrangement. What happened next was witnessed by William Crutchfield, O'Banion's porter, who worked in the shop, and 3 small schoolboys from Holy Name School for Boys, O'Banion's alma mater, who were walking home from school to go to lunch. Crutchfield told police 3 well-dressed and smooth-shaved men walked into the shop while he was sweeping the floor up front. O'Banion greeted them with his trademark friendliness and smile and said, "Hello, boys, you here for Merlot's flowers?" Crutchfield said, seeing as O'Banion knew the men, he didn't view them as a threat and moved to the back room to finish cleaning. He said a short time later he heard shots and ran back out front to see O'Banion bleeding to death from 5 bullets in his face, throat, and chest. The police, called to the scene by those in the neighborhood, positively identified the man in the shop as O'Banion. They searched his body and discovered a pistol in his pocket, an extra clip of ammunition for the gun, and $575 in cash. Robbery was ruled out as a motive after that point, but no one was overly surprised by O'Banion's violent end. Morgan Collins, the chief of police at the time, reportedly said, "I had expected him to be killed, and so had he." No one was ever convicted of the crime, though it is commonly assumed that most in Chicago's underworld knew exactly who had pulled the trigger. Torrio and Capone were pulled in for questioning by police, but both said they had recently put in thousands of dollars of orders for flowers from Schofield, apparently trying to prove their innocence by where their money flowed. The police released both. When the authorities went to O'Banion's home to notify his wife, they said some of her first words were, "Is he dead? Tell me," before she was overcome with emotion. The boys, who had witnessed the shooting, ran back to the school and fetched a priest, who entered the shop to give the fallen mobster his last rites. But the church washed its hands of O'Banion after that, refusing to perform a service for him at the graveyard. They were apparently the only ones to avoid his funeral. Thousands of Chicagoans showed up to view O'Banion in his bronze and silver casket as he traveled through Chicago's north side one last time. Over 25 carloads of flowers were delivered to the florist's own funeral, a testament to his influence. He is buried at Mount Carmel Cemetery, which would have been a few blocks from his old flower shop. Where the original Schofield's Flowers building once stood is now a parking lot. The North Side Gang retaliated for O'Banion's murder, going after the Jenner brothers and John Torrio himself. Torrio was so surprised by the attack that he had groceries in both arms when he was wounded by the bullets. He survived and refused to cooperate with police or identify his attackers, but a short time later he left Chicago and gave control of his gang over to Al Capone. Capone famously put an end to the beer wars with the brutal 1929 St. Valentine's Day massacre, and the North Side Gang pretty much disappeared from the streets of Chicago. But that's another story for another episode. One last anecdote shows the impact that O'Banion had on the mob in Chicago, because Dion O'Banion was thought to be the man who brought the Thompson submachine gun into the fray. The story is that he had gone to Colorado on vacation and picked up the guns there, but had died before he could use them. But after his death, the 3 guns were passed out to his men, who used him in what some historians believe were the first incidents of mob violence to use the infamous Tommy gun in Chicago history. A fitting legacy for the man that the Chicago Tribune called one hard-boiled florist. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy, short snippets of forgotten history between 10 and 15 minutes long. And if you did enjoy, please go ahead and click that thumbs up button. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions for future episodes, please write those in the comment section. I will be happy to personally respond. Be sure to follow The History Guy on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and check out our merchandise on teespring.com. And if you'd like more episodes on forgotten history, all you need to do is subscribe.